The winter of 1883 came early to the Wyoming high country, bringing with it a silence so deep it felt heavy on the lungs. Elias Thorne was a man who respected that silence, mostly because he knew what kind of monsters could hide inside it. He was chopping wood near the edge of the clearing, the axe rhythmically splitting the frozen pine, while his 6-year-old daughter, Clara, played in the snow a few yards away. She was building a snowman, her laughter ringing out like small bells in the vast, gray emptiness of the mountains. Elias stopped for a moment to wipe the sweat from his forehead, despite the freezing temperature, and looked at her. She was the only thing left in this world that made sense to him after his wife had passed the fever winter before. But the silence of the forest was suddenly broken, not by a sound, but by a lack of one. The birds had stopped singing. The wind seemed to hold its breath. Elias gripped the handle of his axe tighter, his instincts screaming that they were being watched. He turned slowly, scanning the tree line, his eyes narrowing against the glare of the snow. And then he saw it. Emerging from the shadows of the dense timber wasn't just a bear. It was a nightmare made of muscle and fur. It was a grizzly, but larger than any Elias had ever seen. Its coat matted with old blood and mud, standing on its hind legs like a distorted man. But what froze Elias's blood wasn't the size of the beast. It was the red paint smeared across its chest. Rough, tribal markings that Elias recognized instantly. This wasn't a wild animal. This was a spirit bear, a creature bound to the local Arapaho band, considered sacred, a vessel for the souls of their greatest warriors. To kill it was a death sentence. To let it live was suicide. The bear dropped to all fours and let out a roar that shook the snow from the branches above. It didn't look at Elias. It looked straight at Clara. Elias didn't think. He didn't calculate the politics of the frontier or the treaties he was about to break. He just moved. "Clara, run to the cabin," he screamed, his voice tearing through the cold air. The little girl froze, her eyes wide with terror, unable to process the monster charging toward her. The bear covered the ground with terrifying speed, snow exploding under its massive paws. Elias dropped the axe and unslung the Winchester rifle from his back, his hands moving with the practiced speed of a veteran soldier. He worked the lever, chambering around, and brought the stock to his shoulder. He knew that pulling this trigger would bring a war to his doorstep. He knew the Arapaho would track the killer of a spirit bear to the ends of the earth. But as the beast closed the distance to his daughter, opening jaws that could crush a human skull like an eggshell, Elias saw only one choice. He exhaled, steadied his aim, and fired. The shot cracked like thunder, echoing off the canyon walls. The bullet struck the bear in the shoulder, shattering bone, but the momentum carried the beast forward. It crashed into the snow just feet from Clara, sliding past her, snapping and snarling in pain and rage. Elias ran, pumping the lever again. He placed himself between the girl and the wounded good beast, de rose blood-dark and steaming against the white snow, and lunged. Elias fired again, point-blank into the chest. The animal fell heavy, its breath coming in wet, ragged gasps, its eyes locking onto Elias with an intelligence that was almost human. As the light faded from the creature's eyes, Elias realized with a sinking heart that he hadn't just killed a bear. He had started a war. The silence that followed the gunshot was heavier than before. It was the silence of a tomb. Elias scooped Clara up in his arms, shushing her terrified sobs, and carried her into the cabin. He barred the heavy oak door, dropped the thick wooden shutters over the windows, and checked the load in every firearm he owned. He spent the next hours in a state of grim preparation. He melted lead to cast more bullets. He filled buckets with water in case they tried to burn the cabin down. He explained to Clara that they were playing a game, a quiet game, where they had to be as still as mice, but his hands shook as he cleaned his revolver. He knew the legends of the spirit bear. The Arapaho believed that the creature was the physical protector of their territory. It was said that the warrior who bonded with the bear could see through its eyes, feel what it felt. If that was true, then somewhere in the hills, a war chief had just felt a bullet tear through his own chest. Night fell like a shroud. Elias didn't sleep. He sat by the crack in the shutter, watching the tree line, waiting for the inevitable retaliation. He expected fire arrows. He expected war cries. He expected the overwhelming force of a tribe wronged in the deepest possible way. But the night remained quiet. Too quiet. Too quiet. The moon rose high and pale, illuminating the carcass of the massive bear still lying in the front yard. The snow had begun to fall again, slowly burying the dark shape, hiding the red paint that marked it as sacred. Elias prayed for a blizzard. A storm might cover their tracks, might give them a chance to escape at first light. But deep down, he knew there was no escaping this. You don't outrun a curse. You don't outrun the vengeance of the High Plains tribes. As the first gray light of dawn began to bleed into the sky, Elias stood up, his muscles stiff and aching. He hadn't heard a sound all night. No footsteps, no horses. Maybe he was wrong. Maybe the bear was a rogue, an outcast. He moved to the door and listened. Nothing. Slowly, carefully, he lifted the heavy wooden bar and cracked the door open an inch. The cold air rushed in, biting at his face. He pushed the door wider and stepped out onto the porch, his rifle raised and ready. He looked at the clearing. The bear was still there, a mound of white under the fresh snow. But then, his eyes were drawn to the railing of his porch, right next to where he was standing. His breath caught in his throat. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. Driven deep into the wood of the railing was a lance. It was beautiful and terrifying. The shaft was made of polished ash wood, wrapped in leather and fur. Feathers from a golden eagle hung from the grip, fluttering slightly in the morning breeze. But it was the tip that made Elias's knees weak. It was an obsidian point, black as midnight, and tied just below it was a strip of red cloth, the same red paint that was on the bear. Someone had been here. While he watched the tree line, while he guarded the windows, an Arapaho warrior had walked right up to his door, silent as a ghost, and planted this message. They could have killed him. They could have burned a cabin while he slept. Instead, they left this. Elias stared at the lance, his mind racing to understand the symbology. In some tribes, a lance meant a declaration of war. In others, it was a boundary marker. But the red cloth, red usually meant blood. It meant a debt was owed. Elias stepped back inside and locked the door, his back sliding down the rough timber until he hit the floor. The message was clear. We are here. We can touch you whenever we want. And we are waiting. The psychological weight of the lance was far heavier than any physical attack. It was a statement of absolute dominance. Clara woke up rubbing her eyes, asking if the bad bear was gone. Yes, honey, Elias lied, his voice rasping. The bear is gone, but we need to stay inside a little longer. He went to the window again. The forest looked different now. Every shadow looked like a warrior. Every swaying branch looked like a signal. The morning stretched on, agonizingly slow. Elias knew he couldn't leave. If they were watching Gant, they certainly were trying to run, would only trigger the attack. They were keeping him penned in, letting the fear rot him from the inside out. It was a classic tactic. A terrified man makes mistakes. A terrified man wastes his ammunition shooting at shadows. Around noon, the sound began. It wasn't shouting. It was a rhythmic, low thumping. Drums, but not the fast, frantic beat of a war dance. These was slow, steady, mournful. Boom, boom. It echoed off the canyon walls, surrounding the cabin so completely that it was impossible to tell where it was coming from. Elias checked his rifle again. He had 40 rounds for the Winchester, 6 in his Colt, maybe 20 more in a box, against a war party of 50. It wouldn't last 5 minutes. He looked at Clara, who was playing with a wooden doll, humming along to the drums, innocent of the death sentence they beat out. He made a decision. He wouldn't let them take her. If they breached the door, he would save the last bullet for her. He shook the thought away. He couldn't think like that. Not yet. The drums grew louder as the afternoon wore on. Then, abruptly, they stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. It was the silence of the intake of breath before the scream. Elias moved to the front shutter and peered through the crack. At the edge of the forest, the shadows began to detach themselves from the trees. One by one, mounted figures emerged into the clearing. They sat on their ponies, Statues of bronze and leather, their breath steaming in the cold air. There were dozens of them. But they didn't charge. They formed a semicircle around the cabin, just out of effective rifle range. In the center of the line, a rider on a magnificent white stallion moved forward. He wore a headdress of eagle feathers that trailed down to his horse's flank. His face was painted with black stripes, the color of death, but also the color of judgment. He carried no weapon in his hands, only a buffalo hide shield. He rode slowly toward the cabin, stopping 10 yards from the porch, right next to the dead bear. He looked at the carcass, then looked up at the cabin door. He didn't yell. He didn't gesture. He just sat there, waiting. Elias knew what he had to do. Hiding in the dark wouldn't save them. If he wanted any chance of mercy for Clara, he had to face this man. "Stay here, Clara," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Do not open this door for anyone but me. Do you understand?" "Yes, Papa," she whispered back. Elias took a deep breath, gripped his rifle not aggressively, but firmly, and unbarred the door. He stepped out onto the porch, the wood creaking under his boots, and faced the judgment of the Arapaho nation. The lance was still there, vibrating slightly in the wind, standing between him and the chief. The air on the porch felt thin, charged with electricity. Elias stood tall, refusing to show the fear that was churning in his gut. He rested the butt of the rifle on his hip, barrel pointed at the sky, a universal sign that he was armed but not currently attacking. The chief stared at him, his eyes dark and unreadable as obsidian. For a long minute, neither man spoke. The wind whipped the mane of the white stallion. Then, the chief spoke in perfect, accented English, his voice carrying effortlessly across the yard. "You have killed the mountain brother," he said. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. "He attacked my daughter," Elias replied, his voice steady. "I did what any father would do. I did what you would do." The chief looked down at the bear, then back at Elias. "The mountain brother was sacred. He carried the spirits of our ancestors. To kill him is to kill a part of us." Elias gripped the rifle tighter. "Then take my life," he said, and he meant it. "But let the girl go. She is innocent. Seis small. She has done no harm." The chief tilted his head slightly, as if listening to a voice Elias couldn't hear. "You offer your life for hers?" "Without hesitation," Elias said. "Just promise me she rides to the fort safely." The warriors behind the chief shifted, a ripple of movement that looked like a wave of steel and feathers. The chief looked at the lance stuck in the railing. "You saw my message," he said. "I saw it," Elias replied. "I assumed it meant war." "If it meant war," the chief said calmly, "you would have died before you opened your eyes this morning. We do not leave warnings for enemies. We leave warnings for fools." Elias frowned, confused. "Then what is this?" "The bear," the chief said, gesturing to the carcass. "Look closer at him. Look at his mouth." Elias hesitated, then slowly walked down the steps, keeping his eyes on the warriors. He approached the massive beast. He nudged the jaw open with the barrel of his rifle. What he saw made him recoil. The bear's gums were black and rotting. Foam, frozen now, caked its lips. The teeth were broken and jagged. "He was sick," the chief said, his voice dropping to a lower register. "A sickness of the mind. The madness. For 2 moons, he has been hunting not game, but men. He killed 3 of my best hunters. He killed my brother's son." Elias looked up, stunned. I thought he was your protector." "He was," the chief said solemnly, "but the spirits left him when the madness took him. We have been tracking him for days. We tried to put him to rest, but he was too strong, too cunning. He evaded our arrows. He crushed our traps." The chief looked at Elias with a new expression. It wasn't hatred. It was respect. "You did what 20 warriors could not. You stood your ground. You protected your young. You sent the mountain brother to the ancestors before the madness could consume his soul completely." Elias felt the tension drained out of him so fast he almost collapsed. "I didn't know," he whispered. "I thought I had murdered your god." "You freed him?" the chief corrected. "The lance on your porch is not a threat, white man. It is the lance of the broken shield. It marks a place where a great battle was fought. The reality of the situation washed over Elias. He hadn't started a war, he had ended a nightmare. The chief dismounted, his movement fluid and graceful, and walked toward Elias. He stopped a few feet away, smelling of wood smoke and leather. He reached out and touched the lance embedded in the railing. "This stays here," the chief said. "As long as this wood stands, this lance stands. It tells my people that this house is under the protection of the bear spirit. It tells any war party that rides this way that the man who lives here fights with the strength of the mountain brother." Elias looked at the weapon, seeing it now not as a harbinger of death, but as a badge of honor. I don't know what to say," Elias stammered. "Say nothing," the chief replied. "Words are wind, actions are stone. You acted." He turned to the warriors and raised his hand. The riders turned their horses, the tension evaporating from the clearing as quickly as it had arrived. The chief mounted his stallion again. He looked at the cabin window where Clara was peeking through the crack in the shutters. "Teach the little one," the chief said. "Teach her that the forest is hard, but it is also fair, and tell her she has nothing to fear from the Arapaho." With a kick of his heels, the chief wheeled his horse around. "We will come for the body tonight," he said over his shoulder. "We will burn it with honor, so the sickness dies with the flesh." And then they were gone, melting back into the tree line, as if they had been made of smoke and shadow. Elias stood on the porch for a long time, the cold wind biting at his cheeks, looking at the lance. He walked over and ran his hand along the smooth ash wood. It was solid, unmovable. He went inside and hugged Clara so hard she squeaked in protest. "Is the bad bear gone?" "C'est Askif." "Yes," Elias said, tears finally spilling down his rugged face. "And he's not coming back. We have new friends now." That night, from the safety of his porch, Elias watched a great fire burning high in the hills. The drums beat again, but this time they weren't mournful. They were celebratory. They were releasing the spirit of the bear back to the sky. The lance remained on the railing for 40 years. When Elias grew old and the winters became too hard, he eventually moved to town, but he never took the lance down. The cabin fell into ruin, the roof collapsed, and the walls rotted away. But local legends say that the section of the railing with the lance never decayed. It stood there in the clearing, a testament to the day a father's love was stronger than a demon bear, and an enemy became a protector. If you ever find yourself in the high country of Wyoming, and you see a piece of ancient wood with an obsidian tip driven into it, don't touch it. Just nod your head and keep walking. You are on sacred ground. If you enjoyed this story of survival and honor, make sure you hit that subscribe button. We bring you the untold legends of the frontier every single week. Turn on notifications so you never miss a tale from the Wild West. Who knows what we'll uncover next? Thanks for watching.